$60 is not a way to live. It's not even close. But right after graduating, but the thing was that even though it was hard, even though I wasn't making very much money, I knew that I loved it. And it wasn't something that I hated, that's for sure. Because right after graduating, I got a job in the music business. That was what my passion was in school. I'd booked lots of concerts, I'd booked shows with Janelle Monáe and The Roots and Girl Talk back in the olden days. And but when I got my first job out of college, I was running the websites and the tickets and merchandise for Bon Jovi and the Killers. Like, on paper, that seemed amazing. I was working with rock stars. Everyone thought it was so cool. But the reality was that they had hired me to do all of these digital projects, but had no money for them because the internet had basically killed the music business. Music piracy, things like Napster and later Kazaa and LimeWire and little blogs, had killed off record sales. And once again, I saw that the internet was changing everything, and that if I really wanted to find my passion, I was gonna have to follow that change. And meanwhile, I was working 13-hour days, coming home and making spaghetti for myself at 1 in the morning, and just thinking about how my boss had spent the whole day screaming at me, and he was diverting our engineering resources for his own little side hustles. It was just so crooked, and everyone was still telling me, stay there for 6 months, stay there for a year, stick it out. But I knew that that was not my destiny. Like I said at the beginning, maybe the one skill I did have was that I refused to do the things that I hated. So I left, and I went to South by Southwest, the music festival, and at 3 a.m. at an after party, I started talking to some guy about Facebook. He's talking about, oh man, every event at South by Southwest this year has Facebook events. It's so different and so interesting. He said, you want to write about it? It turned out he was the editor of a blog called Inside Facebook. This was exactly what I wanted to do. And since I was passionate about it, the company took notice. I went from freelance work to being on contract, and 6 months later, I was full-time. And then suddenly, our company got acquired. A 6-person company got bought for $14 million. This was mind-blowing to me and nothing I ever expected. No, don't be fooled. I did not get any of that FU money. I started long after the company had started. But I still got a tiny sliver of it, and it showed me that what I was doing was appreciated by the world, that the value of it was really increasing. And the next thing I knew, TechCrunch came calling, saying they needed a new Facebook writer, and now 5 years later, I'm still loving it. And I truly believe that there is a path like this for each and every one of you. So I know that a lot of you guys are interested in technology or you're interested in entrepreneurship. So once you've hopefully found what your passion is and you've turned it into your profession, I want to give you a quick crash course in how to make others believe in your idea. These are my secrets to how to pitch a startup. Really, it starts with what your startup does. I've written about thousands of startups, and many of them are fresh companies that have only been around for about a year. But the one thing that all of the successful ones have in common is that they actually fulfill a real need. They aren't some idea that the founders thought was cool. They weren't something that was obviously going to earn money. They just found a real problem and solved it. To find that problem, you have to build a hypothesis of what people might want and actually test it. That doesn't mean sitting at home with your co-founders dreaming up ideas on a whiteboard. It means getting out of the building and asking everyone you can find. Your friends and family, they're good, but they're gonna sugarcoat their responses. They're gonna tell you, oh great honey, I love your startup idea. But that's not what you want. You need strangers who are gonna be brutally honest with you. And when you show them your idea or your prototype, you're not looking for people to say, oh yeah, sure, that's a good idea, or oh, that's very interesting. Those are effectively no's. What you really want is somebody who grabs you by the shirt and says, I need this. Tell me where I can get it. Tell me how much I have to pay for it. Just give it to me right now. Don't waste your time coding or working on a product or raising money or designing a snazzy logo until you found people that are just desperate for your product, at least a few out of every 10 that you ask. Once you have a startup product that people actually care about, then you have to learn to pitch it. And my favorite pitches always break down into 3 simple parts. The first is, what problem do you solve? The second is, how does your startup solve the problem? And the third is, why are you the team to solve this? So first, you need to clearly explain why there's a big pain point here, either for a huge audience that you might be able to monetize through ads, or for a smaller audience that would be willing to pay a lot for that solution. Next, as succinctly as possible, explain how your product eliminates this problem, making people's lives much easier or helping them accomplish something they couldn't do before. This isn't about a tiny incremental innovation. This isn't about making people's lives 5% better. That's not going to work because network-affected businesses are going to be entrenched and prevent you from coming in, even if you're a little bit better, just because they have a head start. You have to build something that actually is significantly better, exponentially better if possible. And finally, you have to demonstrate that you're going to be the winner here. That might include noting how much traction you already have, or if you have big name investors, or that your team is full of PhDs on the subject, or that your founders have already built a company in the space. But whether you're pitching press or investors, and whether it's via email or an elevator pitch, this format will make sure that people know and why they should care about your company. Warm introductions are always better, but don't be afraid to cold email people or just call them. As long as your pitch is short and descriptive with a clear subject line and lets the recipient request if they want to hear more information rather than bombarding them right off the bat, you'll get your message across. So my philosophy is that the more that we see in life, the happier we get. The core virtue to start with in all of this is curiosity. Curiosity leads you to exploration. Through exploration, you see new things, you gain perspective, and when you have perspective, you gain a shared perspective with others who you might not have understood before or who might not be as fortunate as you. And from that shared perspective, you're going to discover a sense of compassion for them. From that comes this urge to do service and contribute to the world, to have a duty to help other people improve their situation. And from that service comes real fulfillment, because when you give, that's when you feel the best. And from fulfillment comes a sense of gratitude for the universe, that you're even here able to help other people, that you've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to give instead of needing to take. And from that feeling of gratitude to the universe, that's where I believe real joy and happiness comes from. I looked inside, I found my passion, I studied it until I had something to contribute. I ditched a job I hated, but that seemed prestigious, so that I could take a freelance, low-paying gig on something I was passionate about. I kept working until I became an expert at it, and now I feel nothing but gratitude. It's this feeling of being thankful to the universe that delivers happiness. You might have heard that it feels better to give than to receive. Gratitude is just giving props to the universe. So I look forward to seeing how each of you gets out there, finds your gratitude, and contributes to the world. Thanks. Yeah. Hey, thank you to Legacy. This is a great conference. It's very cool. And would you guys like me to do quick Q&A now, or?
Well, we can do, we have time for 3 questions.
Awesome.
3 questions. Okay, we're gonna go right over here.
Let's try to keep it to like questions rather than self-promotional statements. I know everyone wants to talk about the cool things they're doing, and I know I just talked about the things I do for like an hour, so it seems weird, but please. Let's take one right over here.
Hi, my name's Dominic. My question is, what's your routine when you start a new article or writing a piece?
You know, no matter what it is that I'm starting, I always try to do the hardest thing first. For me, like, I'm an extrovert, but it's still awkward to call random people. So, you know, I really try to do that hard thing first and call a bunch of sources who are gonna be able to give me more perspective. Because as much as I think I know, there's always gonna be people in those industries that know more. And then, for me, I just try to get some words on the page. I think the biggest and scariest part of anything is just getting started, and the more that you can just get that first little bit out there, the easier it's gonna be. And I have a trick to this that I actually learned from Mark Zuckerberg. He told me that when he was writing the letter to investors that went in the IPO filing for Facebook, that he too was having a little bit of a tough time. You know, it's scary to look at a blank page with a blinking cursor. So what he did was he wrote on his phone instead of on a computer. And somehow laying in your bed when you have like that tiny little margin on your phone, it just feels a lot more colloquial. It's a lot more like writing a text message, and that doesn't usually feel hard. So even if you're ever having that sense of writer's block, try writing on mobile first.
All right, second question. Oh, right here, that's easy.
Hey, my name's Kazad. I was wondering if you could talk about some of the bubbles in tech today, or what are the biggest ones?
So I think when you're talking about bubbles, you mean like things that are overhyped that might pop, things that might be worse than they seem. The funny thing is that there's always been talk of bubbles, and I think people actually overhype the bubbles themselves. people are always like, oh, there's no way that this could continue being so successful, or like this has to like crash back to earth. But even when that happens, it's usually more of a correction than a crash. What we saw in the beginning in the early 2000s, like the dot-com crash, that was because people just fundamentally misunderstood the internet. They're like, oh, if 1 million people have visited my website once, that means I have 1 million customers. That's not how it actually works. You need loyalty. You need people to pay you money to become customers. So I don't think we're ever going to see the kind of crash that we saw when that bubble popped. But now I think some of the spaces that are a little bit overhyped, on-demand delivery and on-demand startups are definitely in store for some big problems. The fact is that the logistics of moving physical atoms around is really expensive, and it only becomes efficient if you have so many vehicles or so many transportation options that you can basically have someone very nearby who can do those jobs. So something like Postmates, the fact is they're just going to have less drivers out there than Uber is. And any random startup trying to have their own little fleet of delivery drivers, they're never going to be able to match up to the big services that have hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of cars on the road already doing jobs and are able to slot that work in. So I think one thing to be a little bit wary of is the on-demand startup space.
Last question. I'd love to do it from somebody back here. Yeah.
Hey, Josh. Would you have told past Josh, who was interning on his parents' couch, to get up and do something? Or do you think that was fundamental to how you transformed into yourself today?
That's a really good question. I actually really valued that time. I knew a lot of kids in college who actually quit college and immediately went to work at Facebook or went to work at the tech companies, or that they basically started to try to work before they'd even finished their education and before they'd found themselves. So I think that really the fact is that it doesn't matter when it is, you have to find yourself first. And at that time, I had not found myself. I was still trying to fill a hole, and I was trying to do things to make other people impressed or happy before I was trying to actually do something that I loved. And it took some of that time to do it. That said, I don't think you need to have, an 8-hour-a-day internship all summer. I don't think that that's going to be the easiest way for you to do personal growth. But instead, I think if I were to spend some of that time saying, okay, I am really interested in the sociology of the internet, what more books can I read? What more mentors can I reach out to? What online courses can I take? Something that was a little bit more self-directed, that gave me the freedom to still be a kid, At 20, I still think we're all kids. At 31, I'm still a kid. But you can always be learning more. And so, but the fact is you don't have to learn that stuff through somebody else's regimen. So go out and be a little bit more self-directed and couple that time of leisure and recreation where sometimes you can unwind the hard, big ideas and the big problems in your head that you can't do when you're working every day. Combine that with a little bit more of directed study and just chasing your own passions. So thank you guys all so much for talking with this. I'll be back in a half hour. You guys are great, and I'm sure you guys are going to do amazing.